There is a name that, for 5 centuries, has been used as a synonym for evil. A name invoked to describe the ruthless politician, the manipulative lover, the colleague who smiles at your face and dismantles you behind closed doors. When someone calls you Machiavellian, they are not paying you a compliment. They are accusing you of something. But here is what nobody tells you. The man himself, Niccolo Machiavelli, born in Florence in 1469, servant of the Republic, diplomat, philosopher, and prisoner, never described himself as what the world made him out to be. He was not a villain who wrote a manual for tyrants. He was a man who looked directly at power, at human nature, at the machinery beneath the surface of civilized life, and refused to look away. And that, more than anything else, is what made him dangerous. The book that destroyed his reputation, The Prince, written in 1513, was not a celebration of cruelty. It was a diagnosis, a cold, precise, unflinching examination of how power actually operates, as opposed to how philosophers, priests, and poets insisted it should operate. Machiavelli did not invent manipulation, fear, or deception. He simply had the audacity to name them. For that, he was condemned. His book was placed on the Catholic Church's index of forbidden books. His name became a slur, and the ideas that could have made ordinary people understand the forces acting upon them were buried beneath 5 centuries of moral outrage, which raises a question worth sitting with. Who benefits when the truth about power is kept hidden? Who gains when the population remains convinced that the world operates on virtue, fairness, and good intentions, when the evidence, every single day, suggests otherwise? Machiavelli understood something that most people spend their entire lives refusing to accept. The world is not governed by the rules written in books of ethics. It is governed by an older, quieter, far more ruthless set of principles. Principles that operate whether you acknowledge them or not. You can choose to remain ignorant of them. Many do. But ignorance has never protected anyone from power. It has only made them easier to control. What follows are 4 of those principles. Not as a guide to manipulating others, but as a map of the forces that may already be manipulating you. Because the first step toward freedom has always been the same. You must first see the cage. Machiavelli observed human beings the way a surgeon observes anatomy, without sentiment, without the comfortable fictions that make social life bearable. And what he saw, repeated across every court, every republic, every negotiation he witnessed in his 23 years of diplomatic service, was this: men are not moved by reason. They are moved by fear and desire. This is not cynicism. It is the oldest truth in the study of human nature, one that Aristotle touched, that Augustine confirmed from the inside, and that modern psychology has spent a century slowly rediscovering. But Machiavelli was the first to place it at the very center of a theory of power. In The Prince, he writes that men will sooner forget the death of a father than the loss of an inheritance. The observation is brutal. It is also precise. Because what Machiavelli is pointing to is not the worst of human nature. He is pointing to its engine. Desire for what we do not have. Fear of losing what we do. These 2 forces do not disappear in civilized society. They go underground. They put on the costume of reason, of principle, of moral conviction. The man who tells you he is acting out of justice is almost always protecting something he fears to lose. The woman who says she wants nothing is almost always concealing a desire she has learned to be ashamed of. This is not a condemnation of anyone. It is a description of everyone. And here is where it becomes dangerous. Because once you understand that fear and desire are the primary levers of human behavior, you also understand how effortlessly they can be pulled by someone who knows what they are doing. Every system of control, political, religious, commercial, interpersonal, operates by managing these 2 forces in the people it wishes to govern. Governments control through fear of disorder and the desire for security. Religions through fear of damnation and the desire for salvation. Markets through fear of scarcity and the desire for status. And people, the individuals in your life, the ones closest to you, do the same most of the time without even knowing it. They withhold approval to activate your fear of rejection. They offer belonging to activate your desire for connection. The mechanism is identical whether it is conscious or not. Machiavelli's first gift is this: the moment you can name the lever being pulled, it loses half its power over you, not all of it. You are human. Fear and desire will always move you. But there is an enormous difference between being moved and being controlled. The first is inevitable. The second requires your ignorance. So the practice begins here, not with grand philosophical transformation, but with a simple and uncomfortable question asked in the ordinary moments of your life. When you are about to make a decision, when you feel pressure from another person, when you find yourself conforming to something you did not choose, ask what is being promised and what is being threatened. Name the desire, name the fear. That act of naming is not detachment. It is the beginning of sovereignty. There is a line in The Prince that has unsettled readers for 500 years. Machiavelli writes that it is not necessary for a ruler to possess good qualities, mercy, honesty, humanity, integrity, religion, but it is absolutely necessary to appear to possess them. The distinction is not subtle. It is a direct assault on the foundational assumption of Western moral philosophy, that virtue and its appearance are, in the long run, the same thing. That truth eventually surfaces. That goodness, if genuine, will be recognized. Machiavelli looked at history and saw no evidence of this. What he saw instead was that perception governs reality in human affairs far more reliably than reality governs perception. Men judge almost entirely by their eyes, he writes, because everyone can see, but few can touch. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Almost no one knows what you actually are. This is uncomfortable because it feels like an invitation to hypocrisy. But that is a misreading, and an important one to correct. Machiavelli is not instructing anyone to be false. He is describing a mechanism that operates regardless of your moral choices. The world already judges by appearance. It was doing so before you arrived and will continue after you are gone. The question is not whether you will engage with this reality, but whether you will engage with it consciously or be its unconscious victim. Consider what happens to those who refuse this principle entirely. The person of genuine virtue who presents themselves without care, who believes that merit speaks for itself, that good work needs no framing, that honesty requires no strategy, does not escape the game of appearances. They simply lose it by default. Their competence goes unrecognized. Their intentions are misread. Their silence is interpreted as arrogance or weakness or indifference, depending on what the observer needs to believe. Authenticity without awareness is not nobility. It is naivety dressed as principle. Jung understood this from a different direction. The persona, the mask we present to the world, is not, in his framework, an act of deception. It is a necessary interface between the inner self and social reality. The problem is not having a persona. The problem is being unconscious of it, or worse, confusing it with the totality of who you are. Machiavelli and Jung arrive at the same territory from opposite sides. The mask is real. It has consequences, and pretending it does not exist changes nothing except your ability to navigate it. What this principle demands in practice is a form of double awareness. You must know what you actually are, your real capacities, your genuine values, your true intentions. And you must simultaneously understand how you are being perceived, because perception shapes the conditions in which you operate. These two things are not in conflict. They are both necessary. The person who masters this is not a manipulator. They are simply someone who understands that communication is not just what you say, but everything you are seen to be. That the story others tell about you is being written constantly, with or without your participation, and that refusing to author any part of that story is itself a choice, one that leaves the pen in someone else's hand. Machiavelli's second principle is not a license for deceit. It is a warning against a particular kind of innocence, the kind that mistakes ignorance of power for purity and pays for that mistake in ways it never fully understands. In the 12th chapter of The Prince, Machiavelli introduces one of his most enduring images. A ruler, he writes, must know how to use both the beast and the man. And among the beasts he must choose two, the lion and the fox. The lion has the strength to destroy what threatens him openly, but the lion cannot see the traps laid in the grass before him. For that, he needs the fox, the creature that moves by instinct, by reading the terrain, by adapting its form to the demands of the moment. The man who relies only on the lion's force, Machiavelli concludes, does not understand power, and the man who relies only on the fox's cunning will eventually be devoured by something stronger than cleverness. Mastery requires both, knowing when to be, which is the art. This is what he means when he writes, in a phrase that has been stripped of its context and misread for centuries, that a prince must know how to make good use of the beast. He is not celebrating savagery. He is describing adaptability, the capacity to meet reality as it is rather than as you wish it to be. The deeper principle here is one that cuts against one of the most cherished assumptions of modern life: the idea that consistency is virtue, that the person who is always the same, in every room, with every person, under every circumstance, is more honest, more trustworthy, more admirable than the person who shifts and adjusts. Machiavelli saw this as a fatal rigidity. Because the world does not remain constant, circumstances change. The strategies that produce success in one era produce ruin in another. The person who cannot adapt is not principled, they are brittle. And brittle things, when enough pressure is applied, do not bend, they break. This is not an argument for having no character. Character is precisely what allows you to adapt without losing yourself. It is the fixed center that makes flexibility possible rather than destabilizing. What Machiavelli is condemning is not the person with strong values. It is the person whose methods have calcified into dogma, who confuses a particular way of operating with integrity itself. Think of the people you know who are incapable of changing their approach, even as evidence accumulates that it is not working. Who escalate when they should de-escalate. Who remain silent when they should speak. Who insist on directness in situations that call for patience, or on patience in situations that demand directness. They are not being honest. They are being inflexible and paying a price they attribute to the cruelty of the world rather than the rigidity of their own response to it. The fox in Machiavelli's framework is not a deceiver in the moral sense. It is a reader of rooms, of people, of timing. It understands that the same truth delivered in the wrong moment, in the wrong register, to the wrong person, does not land as truth. It lands as noise or threat or provocation, and a truth that cannot be heard has no practical power, regardless of how correct it is. This is where the principle touches something that runs deeper than politics or strategy. It touches the question of how we actually reach other people, how we influence, persuade, protect, and connect. Not through the brute application of who we are onto every situation, but through the intelligent, conscious modulation of how we show up in service of what we genuinely want to achieve. Knowing how to adapt is not weakness. It is not dishonesty. It is not the abandonment of self. It is, as Machiavelli understood it, the most sophisticated form of strength. The kind that does not announce itself, does not require admiration, and does not depend on circumstances remaining favorable. The lion roars. Everyone knows where it is. The fox moves in silence, reads the terrain, and is already somewhere else before the trap is sprung. In 1494, the French King Charles VIII marched his army into Italy. The Italian city-states, faced with an invading force they could not individually resist, were confronted with a choice that Machiavelli would spend the rest of his life analyzing. Some chose sides, aligning with France, or against it, calculating where their survival lay. Others attempted something that seemed, on the surface, far more reasonable. They attempted to remain neutral, to offend no one, to wait and see how events resolved before committing to anything irreversible. Machiavelli watched what happened to them, and in The Prince, he delivered his verdict in a single sentence that has lost none of its force in 5 centuries. The one who is not your ally will request your neutrality, and the one who is your ally will ask you to declare yourself. The logic is precise and merciless. When you refuse to choose, you do not escape the consequences of the conflict around you. You simply transfer the decision about your fate to the parties who are willing to choose. The neutral city does not remain untouched. It is consumed by whichever side wins, because it has made itself useful to neither and threatening to both. It has all the vulnerability of an enemy, with none of the protections of an ally. This is the illusion at the heart of neutrality, the belief that by withholding commitment, you preserve optionality, that you keep all doors open, that you remain free. What you actually do is make yourself irrelevant to those who are deciding the future, and therefore subject to whatever future they decide. Machiavelli is not arguing that every conflict demands your participation. He is not describing recklessness as wisdom. The question is never simply whether to choose, but when, how, and with full awareness of what your choice, or your refusal to choose, will cost you. Because refusal is itself a choice. Silence is itself a statement. And the person who believes they are standing outside the game by declining to play has only made themselves a pawn in someone else's version of it. This principle reaches far beyond the politics of Renaissance Italy. It lives in the meeting where you say nothing when something should be said, and watch the decision go in a direction you will spend months managing. It lives in the relationship where you avoid the necessary confrontation and discover, too late, that avoidance was its own form of declaration. It lives in the long, slow accumulation of uncommitted moments that eventually reveal, to you and to everyone around you, a character formed not by what you chose, but by what you repeatedly failed to choose. There is a particular kind of person who mistakes this pattern for wisdom, who calls their non-commitment open-mindedness, who describes their refusal to take positions as nuance, complexity, intellectual humility, and sometimes it genuinely is those things. But more often, and Machiavelli would have recognized the type immediately, it is fear wearing the costume of sophistication, the fear of being wrong, the fear of being held accountable, the fear of the exposure that comes with standing somewhere visible and saying, "This is where I stand." Power, in Machiavelli's universe, flows toward those who are willing to commit. Not because commitment is always correct, it often is not, but because commitment signals something that neutrality never can, that you are a force to be reckoned with, an agent rather than an object, someone whose cooperation is worth seeking and whose opposition is worth fearing. The neutral man is sought by no one and protected by no one. He is simply there until he is not. Florence learned this. The Italian states learned this. And the lesson has not changed because human nature has not changed, and power has not changed, and the hunger of those willing to act upon others who are not willing to act at all has not changed. You do not have to choose every battle, but you must understand that every moment of deliberate non-choice is a battle you have already lost, handed quietly, without resistance, to whoever was willing to decide in your place. There is a moment that happens to certain people, not all and not by accident. It happens when they stop asking why the world does not operate the way it should, and begin asking how the world actually operates. It is not a comfortable transition. It requires setting aside a particular kind of innocence that, up to that point, may have felt like integrity. The belief that good intentions are sufficient, that fairness is the natural order of things, that power exercised over you without your awareness is somehow less real because you did not consent to it. Machiavelli did not write The Prince for tyrants. He wrote it for people who wanted to understand, genuinely understand, without the sedation of comfortable fictions, the forces that govern human life. The book was dangerous not because it taught cruelty, but because it removed the veil. And a world without the veil is a world in which you can no longer pretend that what is happening to you is not happening. That is the real reason his name became a slur. Not because he was wrong, because he was right. And being right about power is one of the most threatening things a person can be in a civilization that depends, for its stability, on most people remaining confused about it. The 4 principles we have examined tonight are not weapons. They are lenses. The first shows you the levers, fear and desire, that move human behavior beneath the surface of its stated reasons. The second shows you the primacy of perception and the cost of navigating a world of appearances while pretending that appearances do not matter. The third shows you the intelligence of adaptability, the fox that survives not by being stronger than every threat, but by being more aware than every trap. And the fourth removes perhaps the most dangerous illusion of all, that you can remain untouched by a conflict simply by refusing to acknowledge that you are already inside it. Together, they do not make you Machiavellian in the way the word is used as an accusation. They make you something the accusation was designed to prevent you from becoming: awake, not cynical. There is an important difference, and Machiavelli himself understood it. The cynic believes that because power exists, nothing else does. That because people are moved by fear and desire, they are incapable of loyalty, love, genuine principle. This is not what the Florentine was saying. He was saying that these forces exist alongside everything else, and that pretending they do not, out of a desire to think well of the world, does not make you a better person. It makes you an easier target. To see clearly is not to lose faith in humanity. It is to engage with humanity as it actually is, in its full complexity, its contradictions, its capacity for both profound betrayal and profound devotion. The person who understands power does not trust less. They trust differently, with open eyes rather than closed ones, with discernment rather than innocence, with a clarity that makes their trust, when it is given, worth something real. Machiavelli spent the last years of his life in exile from the city he had served. stripped of his position, tortured, released, and left to grow old on a small farm outside Florence. He wrote letters, he wrote plays, he wrote history, and in one of his final letters to his friend Francesco Vittori, he described his evenings spent reading the ancient authors, entering their courts, speaking with them, asking them the reasons for their actions. "Feeding," he wrote, "on the food that alone is mine, and for which I was born." The man who had seen the machinery of power more clearly than almost anyone in his era died poor, largely forgotten by the rulers he had tried to advise, far from the city he loved. But the book survived. The ideas survived. And 5 centuries later, they are still doing what they were always meant to do, pulling back the veil, one reader at a time, for anyone willing to look at what is underneath. You have looked tonight. What you do with what you have seen is, as it has always been, entirely up to you.